Three
Yeah.
out of every four adults age 65 and older now has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And that doesn't even include people with the underlying insulin resistance. And so what I find to be fascinating is that fasting insulin has been shown to predict prediabetes or type 2 diabetes by 10 to 20 years, like sooner than glucose or A1C. So that's really important because physicians oftentimes are only checking fasting glucose and hemoglobin A1C, which could be in the normal range, but in the background, you could have rising levels of insulin for up to 2 decades and not know it, not know that, yeah, you have a problem looming. As a geriatric PT, I saw firsthand that negative downstream effects of insulin resistance. So like end stage diabetes and dementia and heart disease and so many other conditions that can be largely prevented through lifestyle changes, which we share a passion for.
Welcome to the Christian Healthy Lifestyle Podcast, where I help Christians over 40 maximize their health potential so they can age gracefully, live abundantly, and be thoroughly equipped for every good work. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 151. Hey, I want you to know I'm starting something new. I'm calling them lifestyle audits. And I'm inviting anybody that listens to this show, anybody in the Natural Nation, to come on the show with me. And we'll have a 20 or 30 minute conversation. You can ask me any health question you want, and I'll give you my feedback, and we'll make an episode out of it. If that sounds like something you'd like to do, go to my website, christianhealthylifestyle.com/audit, answer a few questions, and we'll get it all set up. I look forward to hearing from you. I want you to know before we get started in this episode, I was on the road when I recorded this in a hotel room. And even though I have a decent recording microphone in front of my face, it didn't work. So I had to use my backup recording for this episode. So my audio quality is really not what it should be. It's not what you usually expect out of this show. But even though the audio quality is not what it should be, the content is exceptional. And I think it's really going to bless your socks off. So let's jump into my conversation right now with Dr. Morgan Nolte. Today we have on the show Dr. Morgan Nolte. Dr. Morgan is a board-certified clinical specialist in geriatric physical therapy and the founder of Zivli. Her mission is to help adults prevent diabetes, dementia, heart disease, and all other chronic conditions associated with insulin resistance. Dr. Morgan, welcome to Christian Healthy Lifestyle.
Thanks, David. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I've been spending some time on your YouTube channel getting to know what you're about. And man, you've got such a great message. This insulin resistance thing is such a big deal today when it comes to natural and holistic health, because I believe that your measure of insulin resistance is an excellent marker for your overall health and well-being. And I love it that you're just taking a deep dive into this. This is what you do. And I'm sure you're helping a lot of people. So for those that don't know, that are unfamiliar with this discussion, would you define for the Natural Nation what insulin resistance is? And could you compare and contrast the difference between insulin resistance and prediabetes and diabetes?
Absolutely. So insulin resistance is where the cells in your body become resistant to the effect of insulin. And the primary effect of insulin is blood sugar management. So when your cells become resistant to insulin, it becomes resistant to the blood sugar lowering effects of insulin. And so, like, let's say you're eating a bagel, right? The bagel spikes your blood sugar, your pancreas releases the insulin, and that insulin acts as a key to unlock the cell to let the glucose come into the cell to be stored or used for energy. And if the cells are resistant to insulin, it's going to take more and more insulin to get the job done, to lower the blood sugars. And so what I find to be fascinating is that fasting insulin has been shown to predict prediabetes or type 2 diabetes by 10 to 20 years, like sooner than glucose or A1C. So that's really important because physicians oftentimes are only checking fasting glucose and hemoglobin A1C, which could be in the normal range, but in the background, you could have rising levels of insulin for up to 2 decades and not know it, not know that, yeah, you have a problem looming. That's why a lot of people just kind of are blindsided by this concerning high A1C or high glucose. And like, I thought I was fine. What happened? Well, what's been happening is rising levels of insulin resistance. Your doctor wasn't checking it. The other concerning thing that I see is we're normalizing prediabetes and type 2 diabetes a lot. And on a recent blood work I was reviewing, it said the normal range, like from the lab report of glucose, was 70 to 126 for normal. And I'm like, 126 is diabetic. Are we like, yeah, are we completely ignoring prediabetes now? Because that's what this lab report shows. And when we're talking about, okay, what is prediabetes versus type 2 diabetes versus insulin resistance, I want you to think about insulin resistance as this train track running from like New York to LA. Like that's the train track. And then pre-diabetes we'll say is Omaha, type 2 diabetes we'll say is LA. Like it's all on the same track, it's all the same thing. It's just the degree of severity that you have insulin resistance, which manifests in different clinical markers for type 2 diabetes, if that makes sense. Different
Yeah.
cutoffs.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point you bring up about the lab calling that normal. And what they're saying is it's normal for the blood that we're receiving.
Exactly.
It might be normal because it's common, but it's not normal for a healthy person,
No.
right? So there's a big difference.
There's huge, and I think the American Diabetes Association came out in 2023 saying that it's okay for aging adults, so adults 65 and older, to have an A1C of 7.0 to 7.5 if they have minimal comorbidities and no cognitive, dysfunction. And I thought, oh, okay, so it's okay to be a little bit diabetic, because like 6.5 is the cutoff for diabetes. We are totally normalizing this. Like three
Yeah.
out of every four adults age 65 and older now has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And that doesn't even include people with the underlying insulin resistance, right? So it's a huge problem, especially with aging adults. And as a geriatric PT, I saw firsthand that negative downstream effects of insulin resistance. So, like end stage diabetes and dementia and heart disease and so many other conditions that can be largely prevented through lifestyle changes, which we share a passion for.
Yeah.
So that's how I landed on insulin resistance. I thought, man, if we can just focus on this, if we can focus on a low insulin, low inflammation lifestyle, we kill the most birds with one stone. We prevent the most disease.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And I think another overarching concept when it comes to building health at all levels is trying to get away from processed food.
Yes.
When you eat food according to God's design, that's going to be better for you. A food made in nature by God, designed by God, made in nature is always going to be better for us than made by man in a laboratory.
Even
So
health food. Like, I think that's interesting. We were talking about Josh Deck, who we both had on our podcast, and he's
yeah,
a gut health guy. And on our podcast, we were talking about food additives and how they cause inflammation in the gut or like leaky gut. So a
yeah,
lot of these processed health, quote unquote health foods, the keto bars, the keto granola, all this stuff, it's loaded with unhealthy artificial sweeteners at times, but especially food emulsifiers like carrageenan and soy lecithin and other things that really impair gut health. So we have to be very wise. That's like one of my core values is wisdom. And so I think that we want to be wise consumers of food products and read the ingredients and get to know what's in your food. And the easiest way to do that is just like eat whole, real food and look at the ingredients because I was in Walmart recently looking for pickles, and it was hard to find pickles without yellow food dye or polysorbate 80. I was like, who's making these pickles? Why are they ruining my pickles with all this stuff?
yeah. I was watching an Instagram reel the other day, and this guy went into Chick-fil-A,
Hmm.
and he's a well-known podcaster, he's Paul Saladino, the carnivore MD, and he's like, "Is this real chicken?" "Oh yeah, it's real chicken." He's like, "Okay, let's look at this real chicken. It has 47 ingredients."
Seriously. Yep. Where was I? It was Chick-fil-A, and I got the grilled nuggets, and I was eating them, and I thought, "These are so good. I just want more. I want more. I want more. I want more." I was like, "There's probably something in here besides grilled
Right.
chicken." And
Yeah.
there is. Like you said, the list of ingredients is this long, and I was
Yeah.
so disappointed. I'm like, "There's maltodextrin. There's all these chemicals that just make you want more." And I think,
Right.
have you read Dr. Robert Lustig's book, Metabolical?
No, I've not read it.
Ooh, it's a very, very good read,
Yeah.
and he really just slams the food processing. He's like, "It's not so much the food, it's the processing of the food."
Yes.
And I
Right.
thought it was one of the most well-written books on the topic of food processing.
I'll have to pick that up, and I'll put a note in the show notes for sure for the listeners to pick up as well. So Yeah, the processing. The more man gets his hands on our food supply, the worse it's going to be for us, right?
Mhm.
So, anyway, let's get back to insulin resistance here. You're the expert in this, and I want to take advantage of this time and really pick your brain on some of this stuff. So, a lot of the times, people might experience some symptoms of insulin resistance, but they go to the doctor, they describe their symptoms, and since he doesn't have a label for that, he just says, "Well, you're just getting older."
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Oh my God. There's so many things. Like doctors are completely ignoring prediabetes, first of all. Prediabetes is insulin resistance. If you have prediabetes, you have insulin resistance. And so they're just not calling it, right? They're telling you the symptom, but they're not telling you the root cause, which is
Yeah,
insulin resistance.
yeah,
So any elevation in blood sugar levels, often blood pressure is actually the first thing to go up with insulin resistance. So if you have high blood pressure, so anything over 120 over 80, that could be a very early sign that you have some insulin resistance. Others could be high triglycerides in your blood, low HDL, like HDL levels. A larger waist circumference could be another sign. Difficulty losing weight, brain fog, sugar cravings, skin tags. A lot of people don't know that your skin is really telling. So if you have little skin tags, that could be a sign. Acanthosis nigricans is another skin condition that could indicate insulin resistance. That's especially common like in the skin folds where you have kind of black, thick, velvety skin. It's not always black, but like a darker colored tone of skin, and it's thicker and kind of velvety. That can be a sign of insulin resistance. The other thing that I would point out is numbness and tingling in your feet or your hands. I was talking to a gentleman over the 4th of July. His A1C is on that borderline pre-diabetic range. And
mhm,
of course, his doctor is just saying, oh, we don't need to do anything yet. Just watch it for now. But he's having numbness in his feet already. And he's like, that's a pretty significant sign of prediabetes or blood sugar
yeah.
control. So we want to be proactive so that that doesn't get worse.
Hmm. Excellent. Yeah, people just say, well, it's not so bad, so I just ignore it. Or, I don't like going to doctors. So, until they have an emergency or health crisis, it's a lot easier to deal with, it's a lot easier to keep up than it is to catch up, right? So if you're coming down with something, pay attention to those symptoms. That's your body's way of communicating to you and saying, hey, there's something amiss here.
Yeah.
It's the time to address it is, nip it in the bud when it's small, when the symptoms aren't so severe. That's the best time. Actually, the best time is when you're in good health, right? You want to build health margin. You want to have more health available than you actually need to get through the day. That's the best time to build health because you'll build your resistance and your strength to avoid dealing with any of these things. It's a lot easier to keep up than it is to catch up.
And it's more fun. I have a couple examples here. So usually I say I sprint, like do sprints or like fast activities to like maintain my fast twitch muscle fibers so that I can stand up from a chair when I'm 80, right? But
Yes.
because I maintain my health, my son went to a football camp at the Husker Stadium at Memorial Stadium in Lincoln recently, which was
Mhm.
so cool. And they had a parent 40-yard dash. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to wear a sports bra. I'm going to wear my tennis shoes. I'm going to really try hard at this dash. And I blew him out of the water and I won $100 and I
Wow.
impressed my kids, you know? So like, I love those little moments in our lives too, where like staying in shape pays off in a way that has nothing to do with the gym, nothing to do with,
Yeah.
lifting weights or anything like that. But the other thing I wanted to point out, going back to those symptoms, have you heard of the rock, pebble, boulder analogy?
I've heard of the pebble and the shoe analogy, but I think that's something different. Go
This
ahead.
is different. Yeah. So those early signs and symptoms that I just like mentioned, those are like a pebble. So I always say like when God wants to teach you a lesson, he's going to give you a pebble. He's going to give you a small little test, a little something to make you pay attention. And if you
Mhm.
don't pay attention to that pebble, he's like, "Oh, I got to get their attention. We got to change something." Then you're going to get a rock. So that could be like your doctor wants to put you on a medication for your blood sugar or your blood pressure. Now we're not like in the early risk factors. Now we're in that moderate range where medications are needed. And then if you still don't pay attention, if you still don't get it, he gives you a boulder. It's a heart attack. It's a stroke. It's an amputation from diabetes. It's dementia. It's liver cirrhosis. It's so bad you can't reverse it. So, a joint replacement, all of those types of things that you can't go back from. That's what I consider a boulder.
Yeah.
And you never, very, very, very rarely, I would say very rarely, do you just get a boulder. There's always going to be stepping stones to that. And view those as opportunities. I think a lot of people like afraid of them or afraid of what it's going to take to change their lifestyle, but recognize that it's a lot more stressful to delay the change. And with insulin resistance, the longer you delay in solving the problem, the bigger the problem gets.
Right. Right. Excellent. That's a really good way of putting it. I'll give you credit when I use that the first two times, but after that, I'm gonna make it my own.
Totally fine. I probably stole it from someone else too, so it's all good. It's a good
No,
analogy.
that's good. I like it. Um, so another question I have for you is, and I think a lot of people might be listening, might be thinking about this. A lot of practitioners are starting to call insulin resistance type 3 diabetes. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so we've all heard of type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes is essentially insulin resistance of the brain. And more research is coming out that how we eat, how we live directly affects our brain health. Our brain is directly affected to our bodies. It gets the same blood circulation. So we used to think that Alzheimer's disease was caused by plaques and tangles. I'm sure many people who have ever studied that, plaques and tangles. But those are actually just symptoms of the underlying root causes. And as best that we can tell, it's inflammation in the brain, oxidative stress in the brain, and insulin resistance in the brain. And so, if we can control those three factors, primarily through diet and lifestyle changes, you can do a lot to reduce your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia, especially vascular dementia. So
Okay.
think about it this way. What's good for your blood sugar is good for your brain sugar. What's good for your total body insulin resistance is good for your brain insulin resistance.
Yeah, that's really good. I really like that. My dad died at the age of 87 of Alzheimer's,
Mm.
and I remember asking the doctor, what do you think? Why do you think he came down with this? And he just shrugged his shoulders and said, "It's probably genetic."
Yeah, and I do believe there are genetic factors, but um, very rarely, I think, are there true genetic conditions. I think there are genetic risk factors like epigenetics. Those factors can be turned on or kept shut off based on your lifestyle factors. So I love the
Right.
phrase, the genetics load the gun, the lifestyle pulls the
So
trigger.
clear. Yeah, absolutely. That is so true. And getting right back to healthy lifestyle. That's why I call the show Christian Healthy Lifestyle, because if we embrace a healthy lifestyle, we can avoid a lot of these boulders that you're talking about for sure.
Mhm.
A lot of it is within our control. We're all born with a set of genetics for sure, but we have a lot more within our control than I think most people realize.
Yeah, and I also think that this doesn't make any sense scientifically, but just from a common sense standpoint, it will. I almost think habits are genetic. Like you inherit the habits that your parents may have had that it led them to have diabetes, and
Yeah.
so I think that that's really where we want to focus is that, and that's really why I started this business because I saw a lot of adult children following in the same footsteps as my geriatric physical therapy patients. And I thought, oh my gosh, if they don't change their ways, they're going to end up with the same things that their parents have. So
Mhm.
that's really why I started this business because I'm like, no one's really emphasizing this preventative care for people that are in I call it the gray zone of healthcare. It's like they're not really sick, but they're not healthy either. And they're certainly not thriving and they're on a bad trajectory, but they're not bad enough yet for their doctor to prescribe a medication.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point, and brings me to my next question: is if you went to get your annual lab work done, you'll go to the doctor and do your checkup, and you have what he calls normal glucose and normal hemoglobin A1C. Could you still have prediabetes or insulin resistance if those blood values are normal?
Yeah, well, technically not prediabetes because that's defined as a cutoff with blood sugar levels. So
Okay.
if your blood sugar is quote unquote normal, then you're not going to have quote unquote prediabetes, but you could have pre-diabetes, and that's that insulin resistance. And
Mhm.
there's a couple ways that you can test for that. The first is that fasting insulin test. You could ask your doctor to get that for you, to order that, but they may look at you like you're crazy or they may not know what you're talking about. I hear this unfortunately more often than I would like, where
Yeah.
physicians are like, well, we don't test that, or like we just use A1C. And um, last I read, it took 17 to 25 years for the new evidence to trickle its way down into clinical practice.
Yeah.
And so your physician could be dead or retired by then. So you want to take matters into your own hands and ask for an insulin test. We do sell an at-home blood spot test kit where you prick your finger and you send it into the lab. I'm also meeting with a company, I think tomorrow, about a saliva insulin test, which is new. So it's not a direct marker, like measure of the insulin, but it's some antibody that I don't know the science behind it yet. I have to look into it. But there's different ways to do that. And I also say if your doctor's not very supportive or you don't have a primary physician, you don't want to do the at-home test, you can go to just like Google Ulta lab tests insulin, and that'll pull up like a $30 insulin test that you can buy. And then you can take that to a Quest or a LabCorp to get your insulin drawn. And ideally, that's going to be between 2 and 6. That's going to be that ideal insulin range. The
Mhm.
other test that you could look into is called a Kraft test, and that's really similar to an oral glucose tolerance test. They check your insulin and glucose at baseline, so fasting, and then you take a bolus of glucose, and they check your glucose and insulin at like 30 minutes and then 1, 2, and 3 hours. So you not only get a glucose curve, which is normal for an oral glucose tolerance test, but you see in the background what insulin is doing, and you can see if you have an exaggerated insulin response. So I'd say those are the two ways to kind of catch the pre-diabetes.
Yeah, that's really good. That second test sounds really effective
Yeah,
because you'll see what's going on over a period of time. But would you have to go to a lab to do that? Would you hang out in the lab for several hours, or can you do that one at home?
that's a good question. Last I checked, I didn't see any at-home options.
Mm.
I do believe you could order one similar to an insulin test and go to a lab and get it done. But yeah, you're going to want to bring your laptop or bring a book or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I get it. So getting back to the nutrition thing, we got a lot of recommendations from nutrition experts, our government authorities, for instance, the food pyramid, but
Yeah.
they're so vague and pithy that they really don't really mean much. Well, eat less and exercise more. Eat healthy. Cut back on fat. They're really worthless, because when I first started my nutritional counseling practice, I would ask people when they come to me, how's your diet? And everyone said, I eat pretty good. And then
Yes.
I'd ask them some details like, oh my goodness, this person knows nothing
Yes.
about healthy eating. So could you speak a little bit to the idea that we really ought to be very, very skeptical of dietary recommendations and why?
Oh my goodness, there's so many reasons why. The first is they're largely based on epidemiological research, which is not a cause and effect type of research. So we want to be careful when we're interpreting, like when we're looking at the research, we're interpreting it. We want to look for randomized control trials or meta-analysis of randomized control trials, not just, we followed people for 20 years. Here's what they ate, here's their results, because the way that they collect that nutrition data to infer that like saturated fat causes heart disease, for example, is
Mhm.
like self-reported nutrition, and it's like what, once every 5 years or something like that. It's so infrequent and it's so flawed, and it's so it has such tunnel vision. It doesn't include what other lifestyle factors were going on. Did they smoke? Did they exercise? Were they stressed out? How was their sleep? And so it's very, very flawed. Like most nutrition research is done with these surveys and this questionnaires. And I can challenge the efficacy of that by asking anybody listening, what did you have for breakfast a week ago? You don't know unless you're
Nobody.
logging your food. No, no. So we're horrible historians, but we're gathering and interpreting data based off of false data, right? So how can we have accurate data, accurate analysis if the data that we're analyzing is false?
Right.
That's the crux of it. So I think we have to look at better evidence, and unfortunately, a lot of the government uh, authorities and nutrition authorities, they really rely heavily on this epidemiological evidence based on flawed data in the first place.
Right.
And it's heavily just influenced by big food, big pharma, lobbyists. If you're looking back at that food pyramid, for example, what's on the base of that food pyramid? The foods that are most subsidized by the US government, right? 6 to 11 servings of grain, cereal, rice, pasta. I know because my husband's a farmer, right? So I kind of I have to deal with both sides of that coin. And so 6 to 11 servings of grain, cereal, rice, and pasta. And then on top of that were fruits and vegetables, which, like you said, not helpful because it doesn't differentiate which fruits are going to spike my blood sugar, which vegetables are going to spike my blood sugar. And so the bottom half, more than the pyramid, was carbohydrates. And we
Yeah.
know that a diet that is high in those processed and refined carbohydrates raises blood sugar, which causes insulin resistance over time. And that's how I grew up learning to eat healthy. So I'd have all these granola bars, all this pasta, all this whole grain bread, thinking that I was healthy. And then, into PT school, I started having a weight problem. And I'm like, maybe what I learned is wrong. And then with my first son, I failed my first oral glucose tolerance test. And by one point, I was mad. And I thought, okay, like clearly I have some unlearning to do. Clearly I have some relearning to do. I can't just rely on what I learned in health class in high school or my nutrition classes in college because they taught me wrong, because I've been
Yeah.
doing what they said to do. And I think, to your point, a lot of people feel like they're doing what they were told to do. And
Right.
unfortunately, what we were told to do is not effective in preventing and reversing insulin resistance.
Right, right. It's ineffective is kind of a kind way of putting it. Really, it's just untrue a lot of the
Mhm.
times. I did episode number 139. I spoke about saturated fat and cholesterol and how we, as a nation, came around to believing that saturated fat is our enemy, and when it's really not. It was based on an observational study done by Ansel Keys that started in the late 1950s, and he called it a 7-country study, and it was heavily biased. And I just looked at some of the history behind that, and I call it the 4 Ps. It's the pursuit of prestige, power, and profit gets in the way of true science
Yep.
and true useful advice that we can use to eat healthy. So those recommendations that come from the government, they're very, very skewed. Another thing that I mentioned in my book, The Christian's Guide to Holistic Health, is the FDA and the USDA. They have competing goals in their mission statements. The FDA is in charge with drug safety, but they're also in charge with the promotion of the pharmaceutical industry. That's one of their goals. And the USDA is in charge of promoting food safety, but they also promote agriculture, which you would know something about, your husband being a farmer. So they have competing goals here. And, it's not all intentional. They're trying to serve the public, but because of the system is just set up such that you might not get the truth
Yeah.
out of those recommendations because of a lot of factors.
Yeah, I mean, the next one after the pyramid was like the My Plate, and the My Plate nowhere mentioned fat, and I'm like, it was still predominantly carbohydrates, and I'm like, how can you think that this is evidence-based when it leaves out an entire macronutrient? So we're
Right.
still so afraid of fat in this country, and fat is actually the macronutrient that has the lowest blood sugar and insulin response. So we
Right.
want to be eating healthy fats. We want to be eating plenty of protein. We want to be prioritizing low starch and sugar carbohydrates that are higher in fiber.
Mhm.
But this is not common sense, unfortunately. It's simple, it's
Mhm.
not common sense. I also think it's getting harder and harder to be that outlier in a culture. Like our culture is ripe for diabetes. Our culture is perfect. Like sedentary jobs, high stress, busy lifestyle, not a lot of time to cook, whole real food from scratch. So we're going to get it on the go on the way to soccer practice or the football game or wherever we're going. And so
Right.
we have to really, I think that's the importance of like having values. I'm sure you love talking about this too. Just faith, family, health, those are like 3 of my values. And
Yeah.
so when we can identify our values and live from those values, we're less likely to give into these societal pressures to overschedule ourselves, to drink, like at social gatherings. If you don't want to drink, don't drink. Overeating food, like we view our bodies as a temple. And so I think that we have to be very cognizant to know and live out our values.
Yeah. Well, now that you mentioned it, that's perfect setup here. I absolutely think that health is more than just physical. We are a spirit, we have a mind, and we live in a body. And I believe that we maximize our health potential when we align our lives more fully with God's natural design for spirit, mind, and body. Because God loves us enough. He's omniscient. He knows it all. He created the world that we live in. He created us. And he loves us enough that when he gives us an admonition, tells us to do something, it's for our benefit. And if he gives us a prohibition and tells us to avoid something, it's for our protection. We've got to just grab a hold of it, wrap our minds around that, and say, I'm going to surrender to God's love and goodness. And I'm going to try to do things to the furthest extent possible his way and let the chips fall where they may. Leave the outcome up to God. You know, one of the things for the spiritual component of health, and I don't want to go too far into tangent here because I want to hear from you, but relationships. The spiritual component is all about loving relationships, our love for God, our love for one another, and the love we have for ourselves.
Yeah.
Self-care is a big part of it. And we can sabotage the best intentions on our physical side with mental, emotional issues and spiritual issues that are not working right. So anyway, that's kind of a whole topic for another episode. We wanted to talk about insulin resistance here. Do you have any thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, I do, because if you think about, okay, what's the root cause of diabetes, all these things, insulin resistance, what's the root cause of insulin resistance? Your choices, your behaviors, your lifestyle. What's the root cause of your lifestyle? Your thoughts. Because your thoughts create your emotions, and our emotions really drive our actions. So, to your point on relationships, how many times have you had a fight with your spouse? I'm not speaking to you directly, but the audience. Have you had a fight with your spouse, or an argument with your child, or a tense day with your boss, and then turn to food to soothe that emotional discomfort?
Yeah.
So I think we have to be very aware of our thoughts, our subconscious patterns of behavior, and get very good at self-study. So I think I'm a big advocate of self-study, because we have a lot of books, we have a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos, but the best teacher is experience if you let it be. But we live on autopilot 90 to 95% of the day, and we're not really present. Like, we're not aware of our choices and of our thoughts. So I think having like a mindfulness practice of like meditation, prayer, reflection, all of those are so powerful, so that you can learn from your experiences and say, why did I eat that? Why did I have that chocolate chip cookie after dinner? I didn't plan on it. I told myself this morning I wasn't going to have any sweets. So why did I negotiate with myself? How did I justify that behavior? And can I kind of take the audience through a little exercise that might be helpful for that?
Sure.
Okay.
Please do.
So I call this the clear exercise. So let's just use that very common example. You said you weren't going to have any sweets today. Then you had a cookie after dinner. And I think this is helpful to pinpoint why we do what we do and dig deeper into the underlying thoughts and emotions that drive our behavior. So if they're doing this exercise, they need a piece of paper and a pen, and think about the last time you did something you didn't want to do. That's, I think, the best example. You could also say a time where you didn't do something you said you were going to do, like you skipped going to the gym for your workout, for example. Or you skipped your morning mindset routine. So on the piece of paper, you're going to write CLEAR, and C stands for context and circumstances, and cues. So the cues would be the what, where, when, why, how, who. So let's say like it's a chocolate chip cookie after dinner. The context was you had a stressful day. You had to do all the child caring responsibilities. You had to cook the dinner, do the dishes, and you're just like wiped, right? You're tired, but you still have things to do for the rest of the day. You still got to get the kids to bed. You still got work to do.
Mhm.
And then maybe like you're in the kitchen. So where are you? What's the location? I'm standing in the kitchen. I'm procrastinating doing the dishes. This is like obviously my own life example, because I can get very detailed here. Procrastinating doing the dishes because I don't want to do them anymore. My kids are yelling. I feel like I want some me time. I want like a little break, and I want to feel better. Right. So that's the context, the cues. It's like 7 at night. I'm alone in the kitchen. And then the L is the line of thinking. So you can usually draw that out. So the line of thinking would be, I want some me time. I want to relax. I want to feel better. I don't want to do the dishes yet. I don't want to do the dishes yet. A cookie sounds good. And then what emotions does that evoke? Procrastination is a big one for me. So, like, if I feel like I don't want to do something, that's going to be an emotional cue for me to want to eat something because it extends that period of relaxation. That's the ultimate emotion is a desire to relax, which comes back to like stress, right?
Hmm.
And then the A is the action. So, what action? Well, I went and got a cookie. Okay, what's the result? Well, you're not going to be losing the weight that you want to lose if you're having a cookie. So we have to really unwind that situation. It's almost like a ball of yarn, kind of like in your mind that's just tangled
Hmm.
and you don't even know where to start. So we're pulling on that thread and we're creating this line between your result and your thoughts essentially. And
Yeah.
so if we're going back, like, can I change that context and circumstance? Can I do a better job of meal planning? Can I do a better job of meal prepping? Um, can I meditate during the day and relax during the day so that eating is not my only time when I'm relaxing? Can I develop a deep breathing strategy? Can I brush my teeth after dinner to change, the cue in my mouth? There's so many different things we can do, but that's a good example of like self-study. Use that clear exercise to get clear on why we do what we do or why we don't do what we want to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I'm in my hotel, so I didn't have, not in my regular studio. I don't have a pencil to write things down. But could you just recap real quick what
Yep.
CLEAR stands for?
Yes. So the C is for the circumstance, the context, and the cues. The L is the line of thinking. And then the E is for emotions. And then the A is action. And then the R is the result. So based on your actions, what result did you get?
I like that. It's really good. I would just add a couple things to it, and that is our thoughts are powerful, but really what drives our thoughts is our beliefs.
Yeah.
So that's something to bring in, I think. And so what I hear you saying is we're in charge, right? We don't have to be victims of our thought lives,
Mm-mm.
right? We have agency, and we can back off. Animals can't do this, but human beings can. We can just kind of detach ourselves from the situation, analyze, and say, okay, what's really going on here? Was I just floating down this river of thoughts with no rudder, or can I steer the boat a little bit here? Can I exercise my agency and make better choices next time?
Yeah, and I think that I love that this is a Christian show, so I can just be open. Take every thought captive to Christ. Like,
Hmm.
have you read the Battlefield of the Mind by Joyce Meyer?
I have.
I loved that book.
Excellent.
That was
Yeah.
like my first introduction into this, maybe when I was in college. Just the importance of guarding your mind against the negativity, against the anxiety, against the
Right.
worry. And whenever you're facing a challenge, take that to God. Ask for wisdom, ask for insight. I think one of my favorite proverbs ever is about, it's better to gain insight than silver and wisdom or understanding than gold. And so
Hmm.
if you have a goal that you're trying to reach and you don't reach it, that's okay because you're getting wisdom and experience and insight that's going to be even more valuable than whatever objective number that you wanted to reach. Like if you didn't lose the weight or haven't reached your blood sugar goals yet, you're still gaining insight. So
Right.
man, I love turning to scripture to get that inspiration and that reminder that like I don't have to do this alone and I don't have to have all the answers. But we do
Right.
need to train our minds and our spirits to be still enough to hear that like still quiet voice of God and let that inspire our choices.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Thank you for bringing those verses up. It's really good stuff. It always adds value when you can see how the Word of God has the answers for us. Right? We just have to go expose ourselves to it. A couple of episodes ago, I did a solo episode on having a devotion life, and we want to put the Word of God inside of us so the Holy Spirit can get it out of us. And we don't do that if we're not exposing ourselves to it. That was episode number 146. Another thing I'd like to ask you, Dr. Morgan, is a lot of people are using these weight loss drugs now.
Mm-hmm.
It's an off-label use. It's the GLP-1 antagonists or agonist medications designed to lower blood sugar, and a lot of it's the latest craze. So,
Yeah.
can you speak to that a little bit about how we may want to think twice before getting on one of those meds?
Yep. And I think when we're talking about this, semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy, there's many different medications now. A few of the risks really to look out for would be like the online services that are charging like a monthly subscription fee. And then you're getting these injections without really having a relationship with the physician,
Mhm.
without any lifestyle counseling. But a lot of times we are overdosing these medications and causing excessive nausea where to the point where people can't eat. And the risk of that is if you're under eating as you're losing weight, which I mean, there needs to be an energy deficit, right? But we don't want a protein deficit. And so that's the risk is people aren't getting the protein that they need to maintain the muscle mass as they lose weight.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we're trading we're trading the long-term result that people want for a short-term benefit. So they're like, I want to lose weight. I want to lose weight. But remember, if we begin with the end in mind, like Stephen Covey said in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, losing weight is not the goal.
Right.
Losing weight and keeping it off and improving your health is the goal. And this requires a different strategy than just an injection. This requires a holistic strategy that prioritizes protein in your diet, that prioritizes resistance training so that you're maintaining as much muscle mass as possible. And
Hmm.
that way, whatever weight you do lose is more likely to stay off because you've developed the habits required to keep the weight off without the medication.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to get that rebound weight gain, the rebound appetite. And I think the other thing that very few people talk about and even consider is losing weight won't necessarily increase your confidence. It won't make you love yourself more. And if you want proof of that, I always say go put on a backpack, put 20 pounds in it, walk around for 20 minutes, and then take the backpack off. Congratulations, you just lost 20 pounds. Do you feel any differently? No. The real benefit of getting healthy and losing weight is what happens on the inside. And that confidence and that personal integrity and that self worth, I think, that self esteem, I shouldn't say self worth, but self esteem is built over keeping promises to yourself over a long period of time. Um, Taking like baby steps in the right direction. And if we don't address the mental weight that so often causes the physical weight you lose through manipulations of diet or medications will never stay off. And so I think we have to recognize that oftentimes people have physical weight because they have some mental weight. They have some emotional heaviness, some mental distress, some things in their life that maybe they need to release. And
Yeah.
until we do that, that physical weight is just going to keep coming back. And I think that that's the real risk of only relying on weight loss medications to reach your weight loss goal. Number one, you have the wrong goal in mind. Number two, you're robbing yourself of the experience of developing more self esteem and more self confidence and more skills that you're going to need to keep the weight off.
Yeah. Well, it gets back to what are my beliefs? What are my beliefs, and what thoughts are being, what thoughts do I ruminate on as a result of those beliefs? And so it goes a lot deeper than just shedding a few pounds, right? And
Yes.
what I like to tell people is we don't lose weight in order to get healthy. We get healthy in order to lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
because a healthy person won't struggle with their weight. So when you do the right things, the healthy lifestyle choices that will cause you to lose weight, you'll be building health at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Or with the healthy lifestyle choices that build health will cause you to lose weight. That's probably a better way to say it.
The weight gain was if we think about it like this too, the weight gain was a side effect of your unhealthy lifestyle.
Right.
Loss would be a side effect of your healthy lifestyle.
Right. And the same could be said for insulin resistance, right? It's the lifestyle choices that lead to insulin resistance. We're not going to go treat the insulin resistance. We're going to build health, and then the insulin resistance, because our bodies know what to do. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. Our bodies know how to thrive. God gave us that built-in intelligence. If we just get the obstacles out of the way by making better lifestyle choices, our bodies will make the corrections necessary.
Yeah, and there's a proverb too. It's I like to always like read through the proverbs for money and health in mind, and I think that they're largely interchangeable. And one of them was like, wealth hastily gotten will dwindle fast, but health or wealth gotten little by little will last. And I think
Mm,
the same goes with like your health. So or weight loss, like weight loss that's gotten fast will probably not last, but
yeah,
weight loss that's gotten little by little health that's gotten little by little, that's going to last because
I like that.
you've done the work and you've changed your habits, you've changed your beliefs, you've changed your thoughts. And this goes into, I think, expectations and attachments to expectations. Have you ever covered attachments on this show?
I have not.
I think it's so interesting. And I think the best, it hurt me personally. The first time that I learned about attachments was in relationship to not reaching a goal. So let's say that you had a goal to lose 10 pounds by the end of summer and you didn't reach that goal. And then
Mhm.
you were disappointed that you didn't reach that goal.
Yeah.
Well, your disappointment is your own fault. And the reason that I say that is because, well, who set the goal in the first place? Who created the expectation that you should lose 10 pounds by the end of summer? You. And then you had an attachment to that goal, an attachment to the expectation. And so I think part of this mindset work that we have to do is really working to release our worldly attachments, attachments to expectations of other people. Speaking of like relational health, right?
Yeah.
How much more freedom do we have if we don't expect our spouse to do this and this and this and this and this? How much more freedom do we have if we don't expect our children to show up and behave like this and this and this? How much more freedom can we feel within ourselves if we release the expectations and we genuinely do our best and let the results be what they will be? And I think that's a really healthy thing too, to dig into this non-attachment.
Hmm. And it kind of is in alignment with, align our lives more fully with God's natural design for spirit, mind, and body. We can let go of a lot of things because we're letting go of being responsible for the outcome. We just lay it at the feet of Jesus and let Him handle it.
Mhm. I love so like one of my favorite verses is in like Matthew chapter 7, and they're talking about like, why do you worry about what you wear? Why do you worry about what you eat or what you drink?
Mhm.
The Gentiles worry about all of these things. Instead, seek first the kingdom
The
of God,
kingdom.
his righteousness, and all of these things will be granted to you as well. Do not
Absolutely.
worry about tomorrow, for today's problems are enough for today.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that it's such a refreshing verse to say, I can do this today. God's grace is sufficient for today, and I will focus on Him and doing His will today.
Hmm.
And all of these external things that I'm attached to and focused on really don't matter in the long run. What matters, and I think that's like why I'm so passionate about helping people improve their physical health, because when you don't have great physical health, it's almost a distraction to your spiritual growth and
Amen, sister.
to your mental and your emotional capacity to have close, intimate relationships. It's a distraction. Bad health is a distraction, and it distracts you, I believe, from fully understanding and living out God's will for your life. Now,
Yeah.
there's a huge caveat there, which is transformational suffering, right? I think that some pain, some suffering, and circumstances may be unavoidable for people. And so, for that, we want to transform that and honor God with that. But I think a lot of
Right.
the pain that people suffer is preventable and fixable. And when we do that, it's almost like a weight is off of them, and they have so much more mental bandwidth to connect with God and connect with others.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's such a really great concept, and one that I like to touch on, and that is, since we are our spirit, we have a mind, and we live in a body. We're creating God's image. He's a tripartite being. We are also three-part beings, and what affects one part of our being by necessity will alter the others. So you can't separate the three parts of a human being. And if we build physical health, we'll also be building mental, emotional health along the way, and spiritual strength along the way. And Ephesians 2:10 says we're created for good works so that we would walk in them. And as you just said so well, I thought you said that really well, that if you're compromised with energy and you have a bad mood as a result, you're going to have a more difficult time walking in the works and doing kingdom work, which is the reason why we're here. That's
Mhm.
why we're walking around on this earth, is to advance his kingdom and bring glory to God ultimately. So, the message is more than just health and wellness. It's about becoming more whole as a person so that we can fulfill our purpose. And that brings joy and satisfaction that you can't even measure.
And contentment and fulfillment. Yeah, I mean, I think I was so excited to come on the show because I've never, ever, ever talked so openly about my faith before.
Mm.
Because you never, like, just in online space, you never want to ostracize. I never want to ostracize somebody that I could help just because they're not a Christian or they
Yeah,
have differing beliefs. To me, I think the most important thread throughout most faiths is love, and God is love, as we know. And so I think that, you know, I was just so grateful to have this opportunity to dig into this spirituality and the my faith, because it's so important to me, and I know it's so important to your audience, and I just haven't had that opportunity before.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm glad to have you on. Before I let you go, I want to just talk a little bit about what we can do, what kind of healthy lifestyle choices we can do. Let's say somebody already has prediabetes or even type 2 diabetes and they're obese. And they say, well, what about me? I mean, is there any hope for me? And if there is, what can I do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm going to give some really good pieces of advice, and it's not necessarily how I would implement, but if it calls to you, if it speaks to you, please do. First, stop drinking pop, like all pop, soda, any sugary beverages. Please stop drinking those. Those are directly spiking your blood sugar and insulin.
And that includes diet soda.
Yes,
Right?
because of the artificial sweeteners that impair gut health.
Yeah.
So there's been so much research done on artificial sweetener, like artificial sweeteners in the pop, diet pop versus regular. They really don't help with weight loss or improving your health because they just cause a different problem, essentially. So please stop drinking those. Find a different, healthier alternative. Number two is reduce added sugars. Start looking at your food labels and look at the added sugars line and just do like food item by food item. Start with your coffee creamer, for example. I used to get 20 grams of added sugar in my coffee alone in the morning with the peppermint coffee mate, the mocha peppermint. And just switching, honestly, like just switching to half and half saved me 20 grams of added sugar a day.
There you
So
go.
make these little swaps. Look at your ketchup, get the Primal Kitchen ketchup, all these little swaps to reduce the sugar, the added sugar in your diet. Really focusing on good sleep, I would say, is important for blood sugar management and stress control. But when we're helping people implement, we really like to focus on some mindset work and sleep and hydration before we hit the nutrition stuff really hard. And protein, because when you have like 30 to 50 grams of protein a meal, so like the size of your hand, and like cut up meat or scrambled eggs, and when you're sleeping well and when you're well hydrated, you're going to have naturally fewer sugar cravings in the first place. So, those would be some easy tips, but also exercise is important. And if you want to start somewhere, start with moving after your meals. So, just even a 2 to 10 minute walk can be great to lower the blood sugar after the meal, so less insulin is needed. And remember, it's high levels of insulin over a long period of time that contribute to insulin resistance. So when we move our bodies, especially when we move after a meal, we lower the amount of insulin needed because our muscles soak up that glucose and the energy from our system.
Right. Your muscles will naturally do what insulin will stimulate.
Exactly. Great way to.
Okay. And it doesn't have to be intense exercise either, does it?
No, nope, just walking down your driveway, walking up and down your stairs. That's good. Movement after meals.
Hmm. Excellent. So, what about intermittent fasting? How does that play into this equation?
I am a big fan of fasting, but it has to be personalized. So I think that most people can help, like, generally tolerate 12 to 14 hours of fasting a day. For example, like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Give your digestive system a good break. And I think I usually focus on food first before fasting. I want people to get their nutrition habits dialed in. I want them to be eating adequate protein before we move to fasting because that's going to make fasting easier. And then we have to think about the person's psychology, like if they have a history of an eating disorder, if they tend to rebound eat after they fast. So it's very person specific, but fasting is one of the best tools to reverse insulin resistance. I just say start with 12 to 14 hours a day, have 3 square meals a day. So if you're grazing, having 6 meals a day, start with 3 square meals. And then
Mhm.
from there, I would progress it, being mindful to not have too low of a protein deficit, right? So prioritizing the protein in your meals.
Excellent. Yeah, the last episode I did, solo episode number 149, was on intermittent fasting. And I think it's a very useful tool for embracing a healthy lifestyle. And it'll take care of a lot of problems. And you will be building health margin along the way.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Morgan, this has been great. Just to wrap things up, I would like to ask you if someone needed to remember, if you wanted them to remember one important thing from what we talked about, what would it be?
Hmm. That's a good question.
Take your time.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is develop a morning mindset routine. Like that's the very first habit that we help people implement. Because if you can develop some sort of like gratitude practice, praise yourself for something that you're proud about yourself for that day, think about your goal related action items for that day. Think about like we call it a personal faith formula. It's like your wellness vision statement. We teach you to read that every morning. But that's like putting on your glasses for the day. That's like putting on the armor, right? The Bible talks about put on the armor of God. And so you want to put on your armor for the day so that when you're faced with temptation, when you're faced to like fall into your sugar circuits, you have strategies that are a little bit more top of mind because you reminded them of yourself every morning, and you can pull them out and you can use them versus like getting caught in the same ruts of behavior. So I think having a morning mindset routine that could include scripture, meditation, journaling, but definitely some gratitude, focused action items, reviewing your health vision statement. That's going to be really transformational, and it's free, and it takes like 10 to 15 minutes, takes no physical activity. So I think it's the best way to build self-confidence and follow through on anything else you want to do.
I like it. So be more intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah. And remind yourself daily of your goals, because when you find your why, you'll find your way.
I like that too.
You have a group coaching program, is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Give us a 35,000 foot view about what's that all about.
Yeah, so our Zivley program, we really focus on insulin resistance and on healthy habits that keep your insulin and inflammation low. So most of the people come into our program wanting to either lose weight or lower their blood sugar, lower their A1C. They want to do all they can do to stay healthy as they age, so they can stay active and independent as long as possible. And it's a 12-week online course, so a lot of videos that you can go through that I made. It took me about 6 months to just like write the course content because, as anybody knows who has looked into insulin resistance, there's a lot of conflicting information.
Sure.
And so I took my time to read the books, read the research articles, really distill and synthesize and organize the research in a way that people can follow. So we give them like a step-by-step roadmap for changing their habits. We cover it all. So nutrition, intermittent fasting, stress, sleep, physical activity, a lot of mindset work, and behavioral psychology, eating psychology, those kinds of things go into the program. And then they get weekly group coaching calls along with those 12 weeks. And then we're always adding things to it. So most recently we added accountability pods by member requests. And so they're after the 12 weeks, they can be paired up with, 4 to 6 other members and then meet together on a weekly or every other week basis, whatever they decide, as like a peer support group, because change can be very hard, especially in isolation. So we're really focusing on that community aspect of it. We got a great course and we're building that community.
Excellent. That sounds great. I'm sure you're helping a lot of people with it.
We try.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Morgan, if someone is resonating with this message, if they'd like to learn more about your Zivley program, what's the best way to get in touch?
They can check out our website. It's zivli.com. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Morgan Nolte, YouTube at Dr. Morgan Nolte, and then our podcast is Reshape Your Health.
Yeah, I want to highly recommend your YouTube channel. I think you make some great videos. Fantastic.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
For more, go to the show notes page at christianhealthylifestyle.com/151. There you can find links to all the resources that we mentioned, an audio as well as a video version of the podcast, and a whole lot more. And don't forget, I need your help creating some episodes. I'm looking for people to come on the show with me and do a lifestyle audit. You tell me what your pain point is, and I'll give you my feedback and get you one step closer to experiencing all the health and vitality you're capable of. There's no charge for this. I enjoy interacting with the Natural Nation. It won't be live, so no pressure there. And an added bonus is you'll get a behind-the-scenes look at the Christian Healthy Lifestyle Studio. For a limited time, I'll send you a copy of my book, The Christian's Guide to Holistic Health, as a thank you. Go to my website, christianhealthylifestyle.com/audit, answer a few questions, and you'll be good to go. I look forward to hearing from you.